Hello and welcome to JavaScript Marathon, a full week of free online courses in some of the leading web development technologies and concepts. Excited to introduce Hunter Miller, his third JavaScript Marathon. He's kicking this week off with developing quality through compassion. You can find Hunter on Twitter at @HMillerDev. Welcome back, Hunter, to JavaScript Marathon.
Thanks. Oh no, I have the other, I had the YouTube open, so I was hearing it. Anyway.
Oh no,
glad to be here.
Glad to have you. A special thanks to this week's sponsor, This.Labs, offering personalized training programs to suit your organizational needs, ensuring you and your company stay on the leading edge. If you find keeping up with constantly evolving technologies a struggle and want to bring your team up to speed on one of the latest technologies, contact us today at hi@this.co to set up your complimentary needs assessment. This.Labs is hiring. If you are an engineer manager or a senior software engineer, send us your info at jobs@this.co. We have a ton of upcoming events happening next month, including State of GraphQL, Vue Contributor Days, State of Angular, our Women in Tech Monthly Mentoring, and Modern Web State of Microservices. Angular World Tour continues in Seattle, Athens, and Memphis, and React World Tour kicks off in Austin, Texas next month. And JavaScript Marathon returns our last segment of 2021. Mike Ryan will be here for NGRX training. We also have an X-State training, and Anthony Fu will be here for Vite training. So don't miss it. You can find more information at javascriptmarathon.com. And with that, I'm going to hand the keys over to Hunter.
Awesome. All right, so today we're going to talk about a topic which you may not think is related to development, and that's compassion. So I've been wanting to give a talk like this for a long time. I am a software engineer at Talon, which is a company developing the operating system called Urbit. I do like user interface for them. I was previously an employee at This.Dot, which is a great company to work at. I really enjoyed my time there. I've been a software engineer for 7 years, and I read a lot of like philosophical and spiritual stuff, and that started to resonate as I was like working as a software engineer, and especially like as I was doing like consulting and even some product work, I started to realize that like this philosophy of kind of like compassion and stuff started to resonate with like the same kind of philosophy of, being a craftsman and like really enjoying the quality of your work and stuff like that. So today I'm going to give you a talk called Developing Quality Through Compassion. And I have been watching a lot of anime, so it's anime themed. All right, here we go. So what is compassion? I think like defining terms, and this will come back later, but like is one of the more kind of important things, like when we're working and stuff like that. So compassion is like treating others how you want to be treated. It's also kind of like shared experiences, especially if it's like through struggles, being there with someone. And sometimes compassion takes like a different face, which is like kind of embracing reality. So oftentimes, if you're not embracing reality with someone, like if you're lying or, putting on like on airs or something, like you're not actually caring for them. So, there's lots of components to compassion. I think the biggest two are attention and awareness. So, if you just look at the world today, like there's this entire like attention economy, which is, I'll save you the like political spiel on that. But anyway, like attention is super important And if you spend time with people, you'll start to understand, like, showing them attention is kind of giving them you're sharing an experience together. So you understand what they understand. Awareness is kind of like noticing things, little details about them that like will add to your understanding of them. So these two things kind of work together. And then pain and relationship are kind of the other two major components, I think. So relationship, because like, generally compassion is kind of shown towards someone else, although you can have compassion for yourself. And you can have a relationship with yourself too. So I guess, it works. But that relationship is important because otherwise there would be no channel for compassion. It would just kind of, there'd be nothing to give it towards. And then pain can be a great kind of like binding thing that, especially when shared with someone else, like helps you to relate to them, to understand, what they're going through. And that's important. So the second thing is quality. So quality is like one of the most kind of generic things, and that's, we'll talk about that. But quality is like, everybody knows like, oh, a good quality product, whatever, that's like what you want. But it's extremely hard to describe, and it really, if you've ever read Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, I know some people hate the book, but he talks about quality without a name, because there is this aspect of quality which is like you can't put a finger on it. It's very hard to like specify, but a lot of times you feel it, or it when you see it. Another book that I've read that's kind of almost like, it's an architecture book, not software architecture, but like building architecture. But it's also kind of like a philosophical book as well. It's called The Timeless Way of Building by Christopher Alexander. And he talks a lot about quality. And so he gives kind of these words that they're all kind of part of quality, but they're not, individually what quality is. So quality is alive, meaning that like, something that is of quality doesn't feel like dead or cold or whatever. Quality is whole, so it's kind of like all encompassing. You can't like be partially of quality. It has to be the whole thing. Quality is comfortable, so it feels like home. It feels nice. It's not like there's no friction. It just, you can relax into it kind of. Quality is free. Not free as in like no price, but like it's free in that, it is loose and flexible, and, it can kind of encompass what it needs to. It doesn't confine or constrain you in a way that wouldn't make sense. Quality is exact, meaning that like it solves the problems, as they should be solved, or how you need them to be solved. Quality is egoless, so it's not, putting some grander idea out there that like you have to submit to or, agree to. It's not trying to be something more than it is. It's just what it is, and does what it needs to do. And quality is eternal, meaning that like something of quality doesn't like go out of style. And I think kind of the road to quality, in my opinion, is through compassion. So let's talk about like, what is the typical process for building software? So a lot of times it can be a conflict in many different ways. But generally what happens is like, you have some problem that needs to be solved, or like an idea by like a stakeholder in your company, or, someone that works on some particular product or whatever. And then there's kind of like this discussion that happens, and maybe it happens with the wrong people, or maybe they have like miscommunications, and then it gets like planned out and designed by someone who's not really implementing it, and and then it gets to the devs, and like we're trying to implement it, but we've gotten through all these layers of people and all these like conflicts and misunderstandings, and so where things break down is that we kind of miscommunicate, and part of communication is compassion. And so things break down when compassion is missing. You'll have like one person who they're trying to put their idea out there and they don't want to hear it from anyone else, or maybe it's someone thinks they identified the real problem, and in reality like the real problem is something else and they're ignoring it. And just in general, these kind of like inner forces start to conflict, and you get miscommunication. So communication is kind of the key, in my opinion, and it's kind of another face of like compassion. So compassion and communication go together. So kind of going back to the beginning, talking about compassion, it's like you have to be able to face the reality of the situation. So if someone comes with a problem to your team and they've kind of decided upon some solution and they just know that it's going to work, oftentimes that's not, facing reality. And so you may have to take it a step back with them, right? You might have to ask questions like, why, what is the, describe the problem, and then like, why do you think this is the problem, and kind of like dig deeper and deeper. And so like the way I think of it is like compassion is kind of true understanding, or listening. So they're really kind of the same thing. It's like, if you can't sit there and actually give your full attention and just share that experience with them, like the full experience, not just, what they're saying, but like how they feel about it, what they get caught up on and things like that. That's kind of where your awareness starts to kick in, is like, oh, they get caught up on this one word. Well, like that's a hint towards, something more that they're missing probably, or that just needs to be spoken about or clarified. So, without that, you kind of start to miscommunicate. And also like in the same way that these kind of confusing parts can it's like you can have like a bias. So if if you think the solution, right, you're coming to it with a bias, and that's going to turn off kind of parts of your brain that would otherwise hear some little thing that they say that then triggers you to kind of see the solution better, or the reality of the situation better. So that's why like compassion and communication kind of go hand in hand. So I thought I would give like some examples of how you can kind of leverage this in kind of, throughout your work as a developer. A lot of these are kind of applicable to, other types of work as well. But as developers, we spend a lot of time, communicating with people. That's just the nature of the work. We're kind of these like translators of, for other people to the computer. And, the better we can understand what they're trying to do, the better the solution that we can make. We could hear what they say and then be like, oh, I think I know what it is, and then like go try to do it. But that's, you're not actually listening. So here's a few examples. So scheduling, this is kind of like very basic, but it can honestly like really make a difference for people. A lot of people get stuck, with meetings all day and stuff like that. So like one thing that I found is like, when you go to schedule a meeting with someone, try to look at what is surrounding that time. If there's a meeting right before, don't schedule it like back to back. Give them a little bit of a gap. Like people need time to do things in between meetings. Same thing with lunch. So like, most people like to take a break for lunch, and, even if they're not actually eating lunch, they might have to do something else. So just being respectful of that time. And, if you do need to do something during lunch, like if it's really important, right? If that's the reality of the situation, that it is urgent and there's no other time, right? Then you are being compassionate by scheduling during lunch, because that's all you can do. Another thing would be like overloading someone's schedule. So like, people have maybe meetings all morning, and maybe they have like one in the afternoon. They have this one chunk of time at the end of the day to do work, and then you see that chunk of time and you take it. Well, now you're not respecting their time. You're not being compassionate, because would you want that? No, probably not. You would want like the time to do your job. And so even though these are like small, like I think it can make a big difference if everybody's trying to kind of like be compassionate when they're scheduling meetings. And it's kind of one of those like invisible deeds. Like they're not going to know what you didn't schedule. But overall, over time, like they'll feel like, oh, like it's so nice here, because like I'm not always slammed with meetings back to back and stuff like that. So another kind of version or instance where you might see this kind of come up is like pair programming. And for those of you who have never done pair programming, it's basically like two people, sitting side by side, or maybe virtually side by side, at a keyboard, and you're trying to solve some problem together. And there's a huge amount of or room for compassion in doing this. You could have one person who's like literally just doing it all, and the other person just sitting there and being passive. But that's not really, I don't think anybody would want that. So trying to have one person, at the keyboard, the other person kind of talking through the problem, but also like having a conversation as that happens. If you're a senior with a junior, you may want to talk less and, prompt them, questions about like, what do you think we should do here? That way they get a chance to kind of think through the problem, and, you're kind of giving them space to do so. It's not just you saying, okay, do this, okay, do that. You're not giving them room in that case. You're not being compassionate. And the same thing, like if you're a junior and you're with a senior, ask questions of them, because that's what they're there for. If you just sit there passively, right, you're not being respectful of their time. You're not being compassionate, because you're kind of wasting their time. They have all this knowledge for you to learn from. And if you just kind of sit there and let them do their thing, then you're just wasting both of your time. And kind of one last thing about this is just being patient. And I know that's hard for some people. But people make mistakes while they're coding, mistypes and stuff like that, or even just have problems in general. Just being there with them often is kind of valuable in itself. Especially if you're remote, we don't get a lot of chances to see each other. And so being with someone is a great way to build relationship and cultivate, compassion. So just letting them, be understanding if they're trying to think of something and they're not quite getting it yet, giving them that time is really important. Okay, so the next one is kind of like meetings and time with users and stakeholders. So this is a big one, because oftentimes we're meeting across groups of people. So when you have that, sometimes it's easy to blame the other, right? Blame the user, blame the business people around us, or deciding on what we do. So this is a great chance for compassion, and maybe probably your best, training ground, so to speak. So the first thing would be kind of just trying to listen honestly without judgment. So the people there are trying to, accomplish some goal. And if you come in with some other, bias towards that, right, then you're not going to hear what they're really trying to say. And sometimes that can be really hard. People can misspeak about technical things, especially that's a big one. And I think on the flip side, devs really struggle with, hearing something wrong technically and then wanting to correct it and things like that. And it's a lot of times that's not important. That's not what you're there for. Until it is, sometimes it is important to get the technical details right in a conversation. Sometimes if you're trying to define, the words that you're going to use surrounding this new feature, or a product or something, sometimes those technical details can be important. And that would be a case where the reality of the situation is that you really need to know what this does from a technical perspective. And that would be a great place to make a correction in a very graceful way. But outside of that, it's really generally not the case that it's important to do something like that. So just like before, with pair programming, being patient, trying to, stop yourself and let them speak what they need to speak. And then, once they've kind of said what they need to say, then asking questions about, what they're putting in front of you. They might be describing oh, we're going to have this product, and, we're going to call it a builder, and, it's going to make some item that you're going to add to cart, but it's a complex process. And it's letting them get through all of that, and then asking the question about, okay, what do you mean by builder? And let them kind of explain, even if the answer, sometimes there's value in the rest of the meeting hearing what this person has to how they explain it. And that really goes back to just defining kind of these terms that we use around different features and products, and even in technical discussions, this is the case. But a lot of times you'll have a meeting going, and you'll kind of hear like one side saying one thing, and they use the some term like builder or whatever, and then you hear the other side kind of use the same term, but you might hear it in a different way, and there's like some confusion, right? So that's like the perfect opportunity to stop the meeting. By stopping the meeting, you're taking the time. You're saying like, hold up, like we're not ready to like move on yet because we're not saying the same thing. So taking the time at that point is like the most compassionate thing you could do. So letting each side kind of talk about what they think it is. And maybe it is just one thing and you need to kind of share the definition, or maybe like it's two things that you need to have and they're separate things and you can have separate terms, and that's fine. But being able to say like, we need to stop here and like define what this is, that's your kind of act of compassion. And being that person can start to resolve like the conflicts within the project. Because like I was saying before, like you have this giant project and they might have like a lot of conflicting ideas and forces, but one person kind of sitting in the middle of that can stop everyone and say like, okay, well, we really need to come together about this, can actually resolve a lot of those conflicts. Or, like maybe they're thinking of the problem one way and, you see it a different way. That might actually lead to the project solving a different problem, which is the right problem. Or maybe, it's like the problem that is most relevant to the users. And it's kind of the same with meeting with users. So like, you don't want to like, if you're, if you're a developer, you're trying to meet with a user that they're exploring some feature or they have like a problem, you don't want to like lead them on with your questions. You don't want to like inject your bias into what they're going to say, because then you're just going to hear back what you want and maybe not the actual problem. So instead, like come to them, maybe ask a general question, or just let them speak. Oftentimes that's what they're there for, and just hear everything that they have to say and kind of ask detailed questions about specific, parts of what they're experiencing, like what their problem is. And, that might lead to deeper and deeper questions. And so by just kind of like taking your time with them, you're not like rushing them or biasing what you hear from them, and you're actually hearing what the problem is, which will lead you to, the quality solution. So yeah. Cultivating compassion. So like, how do we get to this point? It's not easy for everybody to be compassionate. Not everybody's like born that way, I guess, or like was raised that way. And that's okay. Like, we're all here to learn. That's part of life. So, one way is to spend a lot of time with people. Maybe that's your coworkers, maybe that's your users, which may be difficult, or maybe it's your stakeholders. Like just having, little coffee breaks with them, hearing about their lives and things like that, will help you to like get to know them and relate to them and share their experience. And like, you can take this outside of the job too. Like it's the same thing. It's like by just sharing some little bit of detail with someone, right, you actually start to care about them more. And like, especially if, they're sharing back as well. really you're like trying to get, into their shoes, which is, it's difficult. You can't, it's almost impossible, but you can get some way there, and like that'll help you care about their problems, which will lead you to be more compassionate towards them. So, one way to do this is like just ask questions, even if it's something like really small, like just about, maybe something they're wearing or like something they're doing, and like something that you're actually interested in and that you care to know the answer, because people like can pick up on that if you don't actually care. But if it's like something you're interested in, then like you're then engaged, giving them your full attention, and they probably will be as well, because people love to talk about themselves. And so like just sharing that little moment can kind of help you, show compassion to that person, but also like in the general sense, like you'll start to kind of be more aware of just other people in general. And like, there's other ways too. So being there when someone is like going through struggles or hurt, like if you're on a team and, some catastrophic thing happens on the project, or, something goes wrong, like that's a great kind of instance of being able to cultivate compassion, because like you're together and you're sharing this pain, or maybe you're just there, maybe you're not in the situation, maybe you're outside of it, but just being there with them to like hear about it and like support them is like, a great way to kind of start to be compassionate, like just being patient, listening to them, and generally trying to care about, what they're going through. Something that like I found, I guess like later in life, was this like whole inner child thing, which like I've never done the therapy or whatever, but like I think it's a great kind of like thought experiment. So if you imagine yourself as like a small child, it's a good way to talk to yourself, because you can be like tender and caring and forgiving, and the same thing with other people. So, I'm not saying like, other people are childish or anything like that. I'm saying like, within everyone is this child that like you can be tender with, you can be forgiving and caring. If you can imagine like, they're like a little 2-year-old that you're trying to help, solve something. Sometimes that's a good way to like imagine the situation to where you can be more patient and forgiving and things like that. So yeah, this is kind of like a way of life. Hopefully that doesn't offend anyone. At least it's my way of life. Is try to be. And it's just something that I've been like working on, like as time goes on and I'm working with people and stuff like that. Trying to align like my work life and my real life like together more. I think that's kind of an important thing, and compassion seems to be like a good way to, align those two things together. It's like a constant struggle. Like it's easy to not be compassionate. I think that's why maybe the world is as it is today. But it's like it's okay. It's important for you to be forgiving with yourself, that like you're not always going to be 100% compassionate. But if you're trying, like, that's what matters. And, I think like your relationships will show it, and, it affects everything that, it affects development and it affects everything else. So like, if you can be more compassionate with other people, you'll be much better at solving their problems, because you'll really understand and feel, their pain. So I think that's kind of the path towards making good software. See something through the eyes of your users and the people who, are going to be using what you're building. And that's it. So thank you for letting me do this. Hopefully this is helpful. I hope to do more of these, kind of expounding more on this topic, maybe getting into some more specifics. But yeah, if you like this kind of stuff, sometimes I write or tweet about this, so you can find me at hmillerdev on Twitter, or at hmiller.dev. That's my website, and I have a few articles there with stuff like this. So again, thank you.
Hunter, amazing. I actually asked the audience if they had any questions, so we can wait just a little bit to see if anyone has any follow-up questions for you, but I have some questions.
All right. Yeah, let's go.
So, I think it's very easy for people to say, well, I'm a nice person. I'm compassionate. Like, I don't need to really work on this area in my life. But in your opinion, what kind of telltale signs can you maybe give people to say, hey, maybe look at this and kind of give it a second look? Like, what are some things, some symptoms you might be, experiencing at work or in your personal life?
So for me, I found when I started to get annoyed with people that I was actually not being compassionate towards them.
That's a good point. Yeah.
Yeah. Or being negative, if you're shit talking other people, other groups, oh, those business people don't understand, that kind of thing. That's a good sign too, that you're missing part of the picture. And maybe you're not listening to what they're saying. You're not understanding their problem or something like that.
Yeah, that's a really good point. I know that you touched a little bit on this, but benefits of cultivating compassion. You mentioned that your relationships will show it. So you will see maybe, your relationships improving. What are there things, as far as even in the development world, what can you see improving if you were to make this a priority?
So you'll start to see, so for one, you'll see stakeholders start to kind of open up to ideas that, your team has maybe, or you, or whoever, the developers. You'll start to see sprints go a lot easier. Things will just be a little less hectic because one side and the other side are kind of understanding of each other's struggles. They know that development's hard, and that what they need is important and all that kind of stuff. And so it starts to build trust, and that's kind of, I think that's something that a lot of dev teams struggle with, is they're in these organizations that it's kind of low trust. Top says, oh, we got to do this, and you're like, oh, why do we need to do this, or whatever.
Conflict.
And so I think that is another thing you'll see. Let me think. There's a lot. When you're kind of giving solutions out, so this is kind of a either inter dev thing or inter design and dev. People will start to kind of not attach themselves to solutions. So you'll see this a lot. It's somebody's trying to champion some very specific solution for whatever reason. And when you start to have more compassion in your team, it's people stop doing that. It becomes more about, okay, what is the problem at hand? And what is the best solution for it? It's not just, Joe over here's solution that he really thinks.
Yes. Yeah. That makes a lot of sense. Linda has a really great question. So let me just show this on the screen. How can we balance the need to vent or release frustration with also realizing that both sides of a situation may have valid points?
I'm going to take a sip of coffee first.
Smart.
I think there's like a time and a space that you can make where you can release frustrations. Whether you want to do that with the parties involved or not makes it easier or harder.
True story.
You have to be more careful. But I think like, kind of like you were saying, like once you start leaning more towards this way, like that starts to become an easier possibility. I would say having someone, and this might not be the easiest thing, but having someone who is good at like playing devil's advocate sometimes can be good person to like release your frustrations towards. So like if they can listen, but also like kind of, you know, after they've listened to you and been nice about it, like, you know, just give you ideas about, well, maybe you're not seeing X or Y or something like that. That way, at least you're getting to release that like emotion, but you also get to learn about, okay, well, maybe I'm not seeing this, you know, for certain reasons.
I love that. I always say that I'm allowed to be mad. I'm allowed to be angry. I'm allowed to be frustrated,
for sure.
but I don't want to live there. So I'm going to use that energy to like move into a new space that I can learn from.
And it's yours, right? Your frustration is yours. It's not.
That's a very good point.
It's not a reflection of the people that you're mad about. So, you know, if you can understand that, then like it's okay to release your frustrations because you're not like being antagonistic towards the other people. It's just like you're in a place where you need to release emotion.
Yeah, totally. I love that. I think that's all of our questions. So if you have any other questions, if you're watching this on replay, please feel free to get a hold of Hunter on Twitter. He also has a website here as well. And thank you everyone for joining us. We are going to continue our JavaScript Marathon week tomorrow. So stay tuned, same time, 8 a.m. Pacific time, 11 a.m. Eastern time. Hunter, thank you so much again for joining us as always. We hope to have you back soon and have a great day, everyone.
Thank you. See y'all later.